Hello everyone, this is Tammy Kirkland with the World Class Teaching Program. We are going to talk about Component 1, the Assessment Center. Now before we begin, there's a few things you need in order to make this training personalized and meaningful. You should have already completed the little modules on Choose Your Certificate and the available resources. If you have not, you will need to back up and do so because in order for this to be really meaningful, you will need a copy of your certificate standards and your Component 1 instructions. And the Choose Your Certificate module will walk you through choosing the best certificate for you, and the available resources will tell you about the resources, including the standards and the component instructions, and help you know where to go to download them. If you've not done that, please stop the video at this point and back up and get these materials and then rejoin me and let's proceed. Okay, you will go, just a quick reminder, to our website, wctp.olemiss.edu, to download your materials. You can find them all in our Candidates Toolbox. What we're going to talk about Component 1 Basics, Certificate Age Range, Selected Response Items, Constructed Response Items, the Assessment Center, and Developing a Study Plan. Let's start with a little bit of information about Component 1 itself. As you know, all the components are weighted, and Component 1 is the heavy hitter, coming in at 40%. You have two different types of test items. You have the constructed response questions, and then you have the selected response. And you can see they are weighted pretty evenly to equal the 40%. The Component 1 selected response is 20%, and the constructed response is another 20%, for a total of 40%. A little bit more information. If you're planning to complete the process in 2 years, we do recommend that you save Component 1 for the last year, just because it does weigh in as such a heavy percentage. When do you begin studying? As soon as you begin the process, and we'll walk you through that. The World Class Teaching Program, as you know, has a Blackboard candidate support course that is a wonderful collection of more resources than you will find anywhere. There is a module for Component 1. All of our candidates are placed in this. We also will encourage you to create an assessment notebook and to make that as soon as possible. And then there's a myth that we need to talk about before we get started. You will hear some people say you cannot study for Component 1. That is simply not true. You absolutely must study for Component 1 in order to do well, okay? So we're going to help make this a very manageable process for you. First thing I want to do is just talk about the test in general. You will have to go to a testing center, and we've got some information at the bottom of this presentation about how you will go about doing that. But once you get there, this is the order of the test. The first thing you'll do is take the selected response items. These are also known as multiple choice items. That test is 60 minutes. You can see on the bottom that for some certificates, math and English language arts and science, that this is a little bit longer. It is 75 minutes. Then you get an optional break that is 10 minutes. That break is an optional. If you take that break, you must go back through security to get back into the testing center. So again, that is your choice. Then the 3 constructed response questions follows. People incorrectly refer to these as essay questions. I don't like to use that term because when you use the word essay, that implies a formality in your writing. You do not have time to write formally when you are taking the constructed response questions. As a matter of fact, you will bullet your responses rather than follow a specific formal outline that you see in essays. But they are timed, 30 minutes apiece, and you can see that the entire experience at the assessment center is 2 hours and 40 minutes. And don't worry, there is a testing center tutorial that you can go in and look at, and you'll see there's a clock on your screen and you can practice with it. So it's just a good thing to know what to expect prior to getting to the assessment center. So there again, that is your layout of what the test will actually look like. Now let's talk a little bit about your certificate, your tested age range. And this is probably the most challenging part of the assessment center, is that you are tested over the full age of your certificate area. For example, I'm a middle childhood generalist. If you see the mouse, you see generalist, middle childhood. You come over here and you see the circles. You see the age range. So you can see that for me, middle childhood, I am responsible for being able to answer questions on students that range from age 7 to 12. That is from grades 3 to 7. I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher, which means there was a little bit of content below my grade level and a good deal above my grade level. So that's one of the things I want to point out. That's probably the most difficult part about the assessment center, is you do have to prepare, because you will not be familiar with all of the objectives of what it would look like for students above or below your grade level. But that is just part of the process, guys. So just want to make sure that you realize that the test will be on your tested age range. Okay, that's why we want you to take your time and prepare for it. Also, very important that you realize and just internalize this: everyone will have to study for something. Everyone will. Material would either be above or below your grade level, possibly both. This is considered the most challenging component, and it is worth the most. And again, if you do not study, you will not do well, okay? But I want to make you feel better, because I am going to tell you what and how to study, okay? So, knowledge is our friend. The more we know at the beginning, the better we will do at the end. You also have access to this presentation. You can watch it more than once. And again, that's just showing the way the components are weighted. We've already talked about that a little bit. This is just a glimpse into our Blackboard course that we place our candidates in. And again, you have to register with the National Board and our program separately every year. You have to register with the National Board and then with us afterwards. And we request that all of our candidates complete our Component 1 module. And you can just see here the table of contents. It walks you through everything that I'm going to tell you. I know when you hear all the information at once, sometimes it's overwhelming, but just rest in the fact that you actually will be placed in a course that will walk you through this one page at a time. So don't let that overwhelm you. A little bit of information about this, and again, this was covered in choosing your certificate areas, but for the people that choose subcategories, you will only be tested on your subcategory when you go into the assessment center. And I would encourage you to ask your mentor specifically about that. For example, Career Tech does not even, the selected response does not even test you on your content. It is more of a global assessment. But again, you will be assigned a mentor in your specific certificate area that will also serve as a big resource for you. Then you can pick their brains about your specific certificate area. Okay, we talked about that a little bit. Let's talk now about the selected response items. What are they? Common mistakes. How do you prepare? And I will tell you, I moved the how do we prepare for this and how do we study. I moved all of that sort of to the end of this presentation so that you could get a clear understanding of what the assessment is, and then we'll talk about how to prepare for it. When you open up your Component 1 instructions, which I would now like you to do, so you could go ahead and pause this video, open up your Component 1 instructions. On page 1 and 2, you will see a test schematic table, and that table represents what is on the selected response portion of your test. Down below that, you will find 3 sample constructed response questions. Those are the topics of your 3 constructed response questions. Followed by that, you will see selected sample response items and answer keys, and then below that, you will find a sample for each constructed response question and rubrics. Okay, so what's the format of the test? Again, talking about your selected response, which we also commonly refer to the multiple choice. You will have 60 moments to teach, 60 minutes to complete this test. There are 45 questions in multiple choice format. Again, a few certificate areas have some additional time. Now, you need to know that your standards are embedded into these questions, and this test is predominantly application. As you go through this process, you need to get clear on the fact that the number one, the sole basis of your certification is your embodiment and your understanding of the standards. Component 1 is not an exception to that. You are also tested on your ability and your knowledge of the standards. So when you open up your Component 1 instructions, you should be looking at a table that looks something like this. Here we are looking at, this is, I think, early childhood, generalist possibly, and this is what their Component 1 multiple choice assessment looks like. Again, you will find this on page 1. Turn that page to page 2. Some of you guys are going to get lucky and find some more material on page 2. But very important, because what is so important here, number one, it tells you what's on your test. It also tells you what's not on your test. Remember, you can only be tested on material that comes from the standards. Not all of your standards will be assessed on the selected response. Look at this. This is an example. You see how I have underlined these standards in red. Each certificate, as you know, has anywhere from 10 to 13 standards. And here you can see they are only assessing 1, 2, 3, 4 standards on the selected response. This is very important because your standards will guide your studying. Over on the right, you can see it's pretty much even, the percentage of the questions. That's not the case for all certificates. So your classroom teachers, and you have given high stakes testing before, you know what that means when you see a higher percentage in an area. You really want to make sure you focus on that. I also want to point out that it tells you what is in each category. See the subtitles underneath it? We will lead you to develop an assessment notebook, and you will actually come back to this schematic, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, right now, I'm just wanting to explain to you what the Component 1 assessment is and what it is over and what it will look like for you. And again, for those of you that had to choose between certificate areas, we always encourage you to make that choice based on the Component 1 assessment. And again, choosing the certificate module will help you through that. If you've chosen one, guys, you can change your mind. You've not registered for anything at the national board yet. So if you're doing this and you chose a certificate and you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh, I may want to do the other one, then you know what? Pause this video. Go print out the other. Have the Component 1 for both of those certificates in front of you as you proceed, because this is one of the most important decisions you will make, is choosing your certificate area. Now, additional places to find study materials. To begin with, your best place to find resources to study is your standards. They cannot assess you on it if it is not in your standards. Your next best place for some of you will be textbooks. Again, I'm middle childhood generalist. I was teaching 4th grade when I did this. My content went up to 7th grade. So what did I do? I went and got some of those old textbooks. You know, you guys, we all have that closet at our school. I went and got a science textbook for 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, okay? You want to keep in mind that this is a national test, which means it will not be assessing Mississippi standards, or if you are joining us and you're from another state, it will not assess your standards either. It will assess national standards, Common Core standards, okay? Another really good resource is Khan Academy. And this is just a screenshot. Khan Academy is free. I know everybody always associates it with math. I just made a screenshot here to show you that it has several other categories in it as well. It's got physics, chemistry, astronomy, biology, engineering, health, computer programming, economics, and then you can see it's got a lot of history. It's even got grammar and art history in it as well. So Khan Academy is a great resource. Subject area tests are also a really good one. Teacher friends, and you can also just Google the skill, and also don't forget to ask your mentor. Your mentor has taken this assessment before, and while they can't share the specifics with you, all of them will have some additional resources specific for their certificate. So make sure you ask your mentor about that. Other resources, again, back to the module inside WCTP 601. Whether you are face-to-face or an online candidate, we expect all of our candidates to complete this module, okay? And we want you to create a study plan. We'll come back to that just a little bit later. Here are your sample items. These are in your Component 1 instructions. It gives you just a few. And I want to point out, if you look at the selected response items, you see where it shows you it's connected to a standard. So when you see that on the assessment, at the assessment center, that should help clue you when you're getting ready to answer this question. Like, for example, this question is tying to knowledge of learners. It is connected to that standard. It's assessing your knowledge of that standard. So that's another way to use that. There's not a whole lot of sample selected response questions provided for you. There's, maybe 4, 5, or 6 and an answer key. Make sure you take advantage of those. Study the way that they are organized and laid out, and just as you teach your students to do, use process of elimination as you work your way through there. And again, they are going to be application, so keep that in mind as well, okay? And it may tell you, it will either tell you the grade level, or here you can see this question tells you that obviously it's a literacy issue, and you've got a student who is entering the class is an entry-level English language learner. So we are talking about an ELL student when we go to answer this question. So your stem of that question will always give you the setting. It will tell you what the case is, what grade the student is, what the issue is. So take a few moments and read that. And also, we will tell you later on in this, but just so you know now, when you're taking this part, you can also flag these questions and come back to them. Now, you don't want to do that for all of them because you do have a clock running, but you certainly don't want to get stuck on one. But if you do, you can flag them and come back to them at the assessment center, and we'll show you how to do that later on in this training. So that's really it for the selected response. Let's talk a little bit about the constructed response. I really like talking about the constructed response because I think you can do a whole lot to prepare for the constructed response questions. Each certificate area has 3 constructed response questions and 30 minutes to answer each question. So you have a sample of each of your questions and a rubric. And it is very important that you know and understand that sample rubric is the exact rubric that you will see at the assessment center. Test-taking strategies goes a long way to improving test performance. So we will talk a lot about test-taking strategies specifically with the constructed response questions. So again, open up your Component 1 instructions, and on page 1 or 2 you will see your 3 questions, and then you can move on through past the selected response and get to this part. Here, this is literacy, and you can see they have 3 constructed response questions. The first one will be on analyzing student reading. The second one will be on writing development, and the third will be literacy across the curriculum. Now, the thing to remember is you don't know the grade level. If you go back and you look at the picture that we showed you at the beginning, it will be over your entire age range. So I think literacy begins from pre-K and goes up to age 12. So you don't know until you get to the assessment center whether you will be analyzing student reading on a first grade level or on a fifth grade level, okay? That will be the unknown. What you do know is that exercise 1 will be analyzing student reading. Exercise 2 will be writing development. Exercise 3 will be literacy across the curriculum, okay? And the rubrics for those questions will remain the same. So again, there's a lot we can do to prepare, and we'll talk about that. Let's keep going. Each question has 3 parts, and now you should be in your Component 1 instructions and flip through to the 3 sample constructed response questions that you have. You have a criteria for scoring, which is the rubric, a stimulus, which is the actual student work sample, or for content specific people like such as English, the ELA people, you may actually have a poem to read or a section of a novel to read. But then you will be given the questions to address, and the timer begins the moment you click the question. So here's an example, and this is analyzing student reading. And you can see here that they've already clicked. See the red arrow, the timing starts. Now this criteria for the study scoring, that is your rubric. You should not be sitting there having to read through that. We will ask you to memorize the rubrics, and that's not nearly as challenging as what you think. But the reason we want you to be familiar with the rubrics, and every question has a different rubric, is because, number one, it saves you time, and you can see this question is going to ask you to analyze 2 significant patterns with respect to reading miscues and fluency in a transcript of oral reading. Then that means if this is your certificate area, when you go to the assessment center, the very first thing you're going to do is look for 2 significant patterns of miscues, okay? You may not know the grade level or what the reading passage will be, but you can be familiar with what you will be asked to do. Then you are going to have to provide examples from the student's transcript to back that up. Then you're going to do an in-depth description of a teaching strategy that you would use to address one of the patterns. And then you're going to give a detailed and sensible explanation of how this strategy will promote students' reading development. And again, this is a sample. This is either early childhood generalist or literacy. You should be looking at your own, but you should also take comfort in the fact that if you prepare the way that we suggest you prepare, that you will know ahead of time what you have to do. Okay, so that would definitely take away some of the unknowns. Then you have a stimulus, and this is a 4th grade question, and you can see this is a stimulus. This may be a middle childhood generalist example, but you will have a stimulus, and again, it will either be a student work sample or it might be something for you to read in history. It might be a document. But the stimulus is what you will be asked to analyze, and you immediately want to look at the top to see what the grade level is, okay? And again, that will help you prepare. You can, and like for this example, you can see I purchased a book on locating and correcting reading difficulties. I was a higher elementary teacher who did not have a real strong background in phonemics or miscues. So if you were asked to identify any reading strategies, math misconceptions, or anything specific, science misconceptions, you can actually just go to Amazon and type in what you're looking for and find a book on it. And look, guys, don't buy the $300 book. This is an old book. This is a 7th edition book. I probably paid $10 for this 9 years ago. So again, keep in mind you can find a lot of resources to help you as well, and it depends on what you know. This was a deficiency for me. Math was not. I wasn't worried about any of the math that I would uh, meet at the assessment center, but I knew when I saw looking at my component one that I did not have a background in this. So it made me study and become familiar with this. And again, remember, it's something above or below you must study for. Then we get to the questions you must answer. And I want to point this out. You have to address all of these questions, and we have a phenomenal strategy to help you with that. Here, it looks like it's just 4 because it's got 4 bullets. That's very deceptive. You notice that word "and." There are multiple questions embedded in this, okay? So keep in mind that is not a clear picture of how many questions you have to answer, okay? Then you have your rubrics, okay? And this is the component 1. And something very important, in addition to the fact your rubrics won't change, we will walk you through analyzing your rubrics. Your mentor will help you with that, and there's also a little mini module in WCTP 601. We want you to compare your rubrics because levels 3 and 4 and 2.75 is considered certification level. Keep in mind, things are weighted, but 2.75 is considered certification level. Level 4 and Level 3 tell you what to do. Level 1 and Level 2 tell you what not to do. But again, this will be the rubric that you will have when you go into the assessment center. So we just ask you to think about it. And again, we've got more trainings. It would overwhelm you if you knew how many resources we had. But we will walk you through really analyzing these rubrics and breaking them down into must-haves. Like, for example, you must have 2 significant patterns. And hopefully you're looking at your rubric right now. And again, you will be familiar with what you're going to be asked to do prior to going to the assessment center. So you can kind of see why we want you to take some time to prepare for this. I will tell you that often you'll hear people say, especially if you get on a Facebook group, oh, you can't prepare for component 1. That's not true, guys, and I've already proven that to be a myth. But you also just really want to take your time and prepare for this so that when you do go there, you will feel confident. Using the rubrics, this is what I was telling you. Level 1 and Level 2 tell you why the answer received a low score. And if you look at this, you can see here that the patterns that they identified were incorrect or missing. The examples from the transcript were not connected to the pattern. Down below this, and Level 2 rubrics, you got to really watch Level 2 rubrics because remember 2.75 is certification level, but anything below that is not. So please do not just look at the Level 3 and Level 4 rubrics. Use these rubrics to help you understand why people get lower scores, okay? So again, Level 1 and Level 2 tell you why the answer received a low score, whereas Level 3 and Level 4 tell you why the answers received a good score. I do want to point out that as with the terminology on all National Board rubrics, a Level 3 is clear evidence, whereas a Level 4 is clear, consistent, and convincing. So even if you see 2 bullets that appear to be the exact same on a Level 3 and a Level 4, Remember, they are not, because that level 4 rubric is clear, consistent, and convincing. And again, a good way to do this is to look at what is different here. Like here you can see the reading is thorough, where here the reading is solid. So we just have maybe one or two differences. There's usually not a big difference between a level 3 and a level 4 rubric. Look for those keywords. I like to lay mine side by side and take a highlighter and highlight what is in the level 4 that is not in the level 3. And because, guys, going from a 3 to a 4 is massive, that really makes a big impact on your scoring. Make sure you use those rubrics, okay? There's a lot to learn from rubrics. So how do we prepare for this? We're going to talk about this. I think I've got a couple of slides coming up, but we again have trainings on this as well. And I'll come back to that because I know there's some more slides. Here are some tips about the constructed response. If you're not proficient at typing, practice. There are many free online typing tutorials. We do not want that to slow you down. Take each constructed response prompt and break it down into must-haves. And by the prompts, that's really, guys, looking at those rubrics or even those questions that they ask you to answer, which basically are the rubrics. What must you have? That just gets you familiar to it. We want you to memorize the prompt for each constructed response question. You do not know what the grade level will be, but the prompt will ask you the same thing. And again, if you go back and look at this really quick, this is what we're talking about, the prompt. And you can see what you must address. If you fast forward that and you look at the rubric, it's the same thing, okay? So when I use the word prompt, that is interchangeable with the rubric. What will change will be the stimulus. But you need to know that is huge. You want to be familiar with what each one of your constructed response questions will ask you to do. Because number one, it will save time and it will allow you to practice. If you know you have to come up with 2 teaching strategies to teach miscues and that's not your strong point, then you can spend time researching those strategies for the different grade levels. And you can put those things in your notebook that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. That will help you tremendously. Also, we want you to bullet your information. Fragments are okay. Now, having said that, capitalize your I and all of that teacher stuff. But you don't have time to write an essay. You will run out of time. So, and again, this is why it's called a constructed response rather than an essay. Remember the phrase quality over quantity. They do not give, the assessor is not going to give you extra credit for listing an extra example. All you've done is hurt yourself if you do that. If they ask for 2 and you give 3, they won't even read the 3rd and you've wasted time. So give them what they ask for. Well, that's just great. Okay, sorry about that. Update. Okay, we got rid of that. And we also want you to incorporate your standards. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about feedback. You should have a copy of the scoring guide, and the scoring guide is really, really beneficial for components 2, 3, and 4. The reason I mention it here is because often I'm challenged with I don't think I'm supposed to integrate the standards, or the standards really important to component 1. And I'm using this here. This is actually from the scoring guide to prove to you that they are. If you open the scoring guide, you will see this sheet evaluating your performance on component 1. Look at the very first question you are asked. Did you study the standards in your certificate area before attending the assessment center? Did you analyze your strengths and your weaknesses? Look down below this. Were you able to make solid connections in your responses to the standards described in the rubrics? Those rubrics actually embed standards and opportunities for you to integrate and embody those standards. So again, this is here just to prove to you that your standards are an amazing, huge, instrumental factor, even in component 1, okay? So, am I supposed to integrate the standards at the assessment centers? Yes, this is in regard to the constructed response. Remember, your selected response questions tell you which standards they're coming from. Now, I will tell you, for most certificate areas, you will be tested on content and pedagogy at the assessment center. How do you know if that applies to you? Look at your sample questions in your component 1. For example, math and science people, their assessments are basically pure content. But you can tell by looking at your questions. If your questions ask you for a strategy, then you will be tested on um, pedagogy. And then, why didn't anyone tell me this? Well, they did. The National Board provides many, many documents to candidates. And just as I pointed out to you, one of the very first things in the scoring guide is pointing you back to the fact that your standards are to be integrated at the assessment center, okay? So how do you do that? This is an oldie but a goodie. And again, this is in reference to your constructed response questions, a CIA heart. Now, I have been told by some people that this is too old and is no longer applicable to the standards because the standards have been updated. Well, yes, the standards go through an updated period. They're on a list, and every year they update someone's standards. However, this is general enough that it will work with everyone's standards. So I suggest you memorize this, a CIA heart. And if you look at it and once you've done some exercising with your standards, you'll see, oh yes, these are my standards. And a good rule of thumb, when you go into the assessment center, unless you're doing math or something like that, all you'll have is a dry erase board and a marker. Just write a CIA heart on it. And when an opportunity comes that you can integrate a standard into one of your written responses at the constructed response portions, integrate a standard. By no means are you expected to integrate all the standards, but you are expected to integrate standards, and those teaching strategies that you discuss in your response, guys, should be at the same instructional level that your components 2, 3, and 4 would be. Do not go in there and just drop down to DOK1 and DOK2. That will not go well, okay? So again, you can, and again, you have access to this PowerPoint, and this is in the Module 1 in WCTP 601. Also, this is a mnemonic device that I created. Your scoring, and when you looked back at the introduction that you went through and the resources, one of the very first resources I talked about was the Architect of Accomplished Teaching, because all of your standards, which you are assessed on your standards, but the standards all relate back to and are connected to the 5 core propositions, which are embedded in the Architect of Accomplished Teaching. So this just sort of helps you refocus. This would be, if we were to have a chart on the wall and you were doing National Board certification, this would be our anchor chart. This is where we come back to when we get confused, when we get overwhelmed. What are we doing? Who are our students? Who are they? Where are they? Think knowledge of students. Then you set goals. Now, these goals are academic objectives, okay? The National Board is not going to use the words academic objectives. They're going to use the word goals, which are objectives for you, the candidate, okay? After that, you align your instruction with the goal. And keep in mind, with always knowledge of students, your goals are already preset for you. You have a mandate on what you have to teach. The state of Mississippi does that. However, how you teach that should be taken into effect considering who your students are. Then you assess, think formative assessment. You teach, you assess, you collect data. How did it go? What did they get? What did they not get? That's what we call reflecting. Then you adjust those goals. Maybe you teach a mini lesson. Maybe they've showed mastery and you move on. But again, this is just a mnemonic device, and this can help you in your constructed response questions as well as your commentary uh, that you have to write for components 1 and 2. And again, it's just like the anchor chart for national boards. Students get inspired after reaching goals. A note to secondary students, again, your test is more content-based. You do have content standards, so make sure you are very familiar with your content standards across the age range of your certificate area. Certificate areas requiring a response booklet, some of them do. You will know this ahead of time. It should be in your component instructions. The response booklet should not be used for the selected response, so they will give this to you at the assessment center, but you also need to be prepared to handwrite your ID on the response booklet, and just be aware of the fact if you're supposed to have one. If they don't give you one and you're supposed to have one, that will fall back on you. So just be familiar if you are to have one or not. And again, your component 1 instructions will tell you that if you are. Calculators. No one carries a calculator in. If you need a calculator, it will populate the screen for you. Okay. Practice. Now let's go back. I told you that we were going to talk about really what is the assessment, and then we'll come back a little bit more and talk about how to practice for it. So let's look back at the constructed response questions. There are 2 things that I want you to do. Number 1, you have 3 samples. You have a sample for each one of your constructed response questions. When you get ready to practice, don't worry about a timer. Method 1 is not about a timer. Method 1 should be pencil and paper. And the purpose of this practice is to teach you how to thoroughly answer the questions, okay? And we will ask you to use any possible materials that you have. Any, your standards, your rubrics, your assessment notebook. Because again, we're not focusing on the focus on this is how to answer the question. I also want to point out that when you go to answer the question, that we want you to lay out that question, and this is in the 601, it specifically tells you. You will take those bullets of your prompt, and the very first thing you will do is bullet those. 2 miscues. You would write 2 miscues, skip a spot, and then you would example from student paper. So what we want you to do is just to outline everything you have to answer at the very beginning. And again, the module in 601 will walk you through how to do this. But that just makes sure that you address all of the questions, and it eliminates the fact that you might possibly run out of time before you get to a question, hopefully, because you can see in front of you what you have to answer. Don't worry, again, about a timer. You want to do this for each one of your questions. Hopefully, you will do this in a mentoring group, whether it's face-to-face or online, and you work through it together, just focusing on learning how to answer the question. Then method 2, once you've done that, then that's when we want to get the timer out, okay? We want you to use your phone, a kitchen timer, whatever, set it to 30 minutes. We want to practice being as close to the situation that you'll have at the testing center. So we want you to compose in a Word document to mimic the real environment. We will ask you to pull up an electronic copy of your Component 1 instructions and copy and paste that question into a Word document, okay? Copy and paste. And then once you've got it on your computer and everything, and you can leave, if you've got a stimulus, you can leave that laying beside you. Put away everything else and then hit go and see if you can answer the question again. And don't be hard on yourself. If you can't answer it 30 minutes in the first time, that's okay. Again, this is why we want you to practice. And I know this probably sounds like a lot, but guys, you're teachers. You recognize a lot of this is test-taking strategy. You know how significant that is to test performance. So I hope it makes you feel better knowing that we have a plan to help you. So again, we have a specific method of how to do this, and we'll go over with you this in more detail later. Additional information, there is also a document called the Component 1 Content Knowledge Assessment Center Policy and Guidelines. The assessment center, first off, no one likes the assessment center, okay? Some people get really nervous. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the guidelines. Pearson does administer this test, okay? Make sure you're familiar with the scoring guide. And there is a Component 1 tutorial as well. And I think I have a picture of that. Yes. And there's a link for this in the Component 1 module. I think there's also a link in the Candidates Toolbox. And it pops up. You do not have to download anything onto your desktop, okay? And over here on the right, you can see where you have to create an account, sign in. Don't worry about that now. That is so far in your future. Just pretend you don't see that, okay? I will point out, however, there are testing accommodations, and if you sign up for Component 1 and you do need testing accommodations, you need to get that into the National Board immediately. If you are a diabetic and you are on a pump, I would fill that out, because should you go high or low during the assessment, we would not want you to lose the opportunity to go back and redo that test. And if you don't have the accommodations in place, letting them be aware of that situation, you won't be given the opportunity to redo. Also, if you're ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, severe anxiety, you can get, you've got to be prior diagnosed. But those are things that you want accommodations for. Also, if English is not your first language, you automatically qualify for testing accommodations. So make sure you do that. Okay, back to this. You can see down at the bottom of the screen, you would click on the National Board tutorial, and then this page will pop up. Now, this probably will not be your certificate area. It does not matter if it's your certificate area or not. The purpose of the tutorial is to get you familiar with the software, and it will not let you go through anything until you scroll all the way down. So once the screen pops up, make sure you work your way through it. The selected response, you are only allowed to select one. If you select the letter A, then select C, your first answer will be removed. There's no penalty for changing your answers. You can move to any question of the exam, talking about selected response, using the navigator buttons. And again, you can practice this with a tutorial. You can also flag questions and come back to them. And that's good if you get stuck, but you don't go through and think, oh, I'm going to read through them and flag and then come back. No, you don't have time for that, okay? You only flag the ones that have just really stumped you and maybe, stressing you. Come back to those, okay? So the tutorial will show you how to do that. Assessment center problems. Should you have any problem at the assessment center, raise your hand and tell them immediately, okay? You also must then notify the National Board within 7 business days. And a lot of this will not apply to you right now, but we just want you to make you aware of the fact that there is a protocol for all of this, and that when your time comes to register for the assessment center, you want to go back and review all of these informations that are available in protocols. Testing accommodations, we talked about that earlier. So make sure you get those testing accommodations in. Registering for your assessment. If you purchase Component 1, and as we talked about earlier, any component you register for in this cycle year has to be fully paid for by February the 28th. That includes Component 1. If you purchase a component in the spring, which would be, next spring, you will receive an email from the National Board. The National Board will only communicate with you through the provided email, and lots of times their emails go to spam. So make sure you give them an email that you use regularly and check it and your spam regularly, because you will get a code, a registration code, and it will link you to a Pearson page. You will type in that code. You will create yet another account. Sorry, guys, that's just the way it is. And then you will register, and you want to go ahead and register as soon as you get that email, because there are only specific sites and it's first come first basis. Not every testing center administers the National Board Assessment, and not every day is available, and then there are selected uh, number of seats. So do not wait to the last minute. Also, don't register for the last day. If you wake up sick, that's going to be a very, very expensive tummy bug, okay? So don't register for the very last day. That's just my advice. Call immediately if you can't attend, and reschedule your appointment. The day of the assessment, come in early. There's a lot of things you have to read and sign. Dress in layers. It may be cold. You will be required to show your government issued ID, driver's license. Your first name on your driver's license should match the first name that you registered with at the National Board. Middle name doesn't matter. First name and last name have to match. Also, please make sure your license is not expired. Happens every year to somebody, okay? So again, you get a dry erase board, and the protocol for the testing centers, that varies by place. I've been in testing centers where they had a wand where they did my arms, my legs. I had on skinny jeans and cowgirl boots. I had to take my boots off. A lot of issue there. Then I've been at some testing centers where all they do is just take your picture and do your palm print. So that is very, very different. Just don't let it make you nervous, okay? Be ready for that, and just expect that sort of situation at the assessment center. Preparing for component 1, finally, a little bit about the assessment notebook. Again, this is in our component 1 module. Why do we want you to make an assessment notebook? Because what we have discovered is if you don't collect materials to study, people don't study, okay? And what you put in your assessment notebook will be the topics that you do not know well. And you will use your component 1 test schematic, and you can see here we have an example of somebody's where they make tabs. Now this individual has a lot of tabs. That's up to you. You may just have one tab for child development, equity, or whatever your first topic is, and put all of your things underneath that tab, or you may have multiple tabs underneath another tab. That doesn't matter. That is totally up to you how you do that. But we want you to make a notebook, and we want you to gather materials to put in that notebook, okay? And those are your subcategories. Also, make a tab for your constructed response questions. Put each of your constructed response questions and their rubrics in your assessment notebook as well. And then as you gather materials to help you for that, you can just put it behind the appropriate question. Where do you get the materials? Well, we want to begin with our standards. And again, you want to look in your standards for that. We talked about this being a national test. How do you locate information in the standards to study? In addition, you will have to have a hard copy of your standards. It would be a tragic mistake to only have an electronic copy, because you need to physically interact with your standards. But having said that, you do want to download a copy of your standards as well. This is why they download as a PDF, and you can search a PDF for those specific topics. For example, and again, you don't have to worry about all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I don't want it to overwhelm you. This is in the Component 1 module. We teach you how to search your standards. And you can see here, we are looking for child development. And it shows you, it takes you exactly to where child development is in your standards. And then you can just copy and paste that and print that out and put that where that belongs in your assessment notebook. So again, really neat that you can search your standards for your information. Again, where do I locate other standard resources? We talked about this earlier. This is a national test, so you want to make sure you use national standards, Common Core for your core subjects, and then national standards for science and history. Remember, you will be tested on your certificate's age range. Very important that you know that. So, for example, I'm a middle childhood generalist. I taught fourth and fifth grade. Wasn't worried about third, fourth, or fifth grade math standards. However, I had to go and look at what the Common Core standards were for sixth and seventh grade students. If there was anything I wasn't familiar with, maybe it's ratios, then I would print out something about ratios and put that in my notebook. So that's how we want to make that resource so that you can study it. Couple of slip ups. Not being confident in your grade level content. Remember, of course, you're going to know your grade level. I mean, that's going to be a given. But you have to be familiar in the content for your entire age range of the certificate area. Remember, you are responsible for knowing content and how to teach it across that age range. Another slip up is not answering all of the questions. This refers to the constructive response questions. And remember how we talked about going in and writing those bullets so you won't skip it. So we just want to make sure that you answer all of the questions. Failing to integrate the standards. Again, they're automatically integrated in your selected response. In your constructed response, you are expected to integrate the standards. Remember, a CIA heart. Number 4, not incorporating lessons of higher DOK. National Board teachers, we scaffold to higher levels, a lot of it query based. Now, if you are exceptional needs, your assessor is also exceptional needs, and you don't need to be intimidated when you hear higher DOK level. You need to do what's appropriate for your student based on their needs. But again, you want to write at the assessment centers and create and draft lessons just like you would strategies, not lessons, as you would in your components. And again, 601, we've got a component module. It will walk you through all of this. There's a lot of information in this presentation. And again, it will all be available to you step by step in the WCTP 601 Blackboard course that we place our candidates in. The more prepared you are, the more comfortable you will be. Today's preparation equals tomorrow's success. So you remember at the very beginning we said we suggest you wait toward the end if you do it in 2 years. If you do it in 1 year, we still want you to go ahead and start preparing for your assessment center. If you sign up, if you're doing, regardless of what you do in the fall and the spring, and you should have a plan, once you do that, always be working on component 1. If you do it a little bit at a time, you will be very comfortable and well prepared when you get to the assessment center. Okay?